Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us. Good evening. Good evening. What a special time. We want to acknowledge all the uh, challenges and great things that have happened to all of us on this call over the last year. Today, we will hold space and acknowledge our professionalism, but also our personhood as well. So, the topic today, the title of our conversation is How We Show Up, right? So we're going to do that over the next hour. We ask that you all engage, put away some cell phones and distractions, and be present. I'm Dr. Valerie Hill-Jackson. I'm looking forward to a great evening with you all. Claudia?
Yes.
Our objective through a community discussion of the discussion framework, our goal is that 100% of you who are participating in our Mentoring and Coaching Academy presentation today will be able to understand how to show up. We're going to unpack that today. Thank you.
All right. So today we are going to talk about the S.E.L.F.I.S.H framework and why does this matter. It is my honor to introduce you all to Dr. Hill-Jackson, the Assistant Dean of Education, Educator and Preparations and School Partnerships, and the Executive Director of the We Teach Texas P12 Mentoring and Coaching Academy. Dr. Hill-Jackson is a nationally and university recognized educator. Her most recent awards are the 2013 Upton Sinclair Award, 2015 Aggies Commit to Transforming Lives Administrative Fellow, and the 2016 Educational Institution Image Award by the Edwards Ministerial Association. Dr. Hill-Jackson's teaching philosophy is best explained with her simple quote, "Students first through action research." Some of Dr. Hill-Jackson's most recent publications include Better Principals, Better Schools, What STAR Principals Know, Believe and Do, Better Teachers, Better Schools, What STAR Teachers Know, Believe and Do, Teacher Confidential, Personal Stories of Stress, Self-Care, and Resilience, and What Makes a STAR Teacher, 7 Dispositions that Support Student Learning. Dr. Hill-Jackson's research interests include critical teaching education, transformative servant leadership, service learning, community education, ethnography, gifted education, culture and curriculum, and STEM education for underserved learners. Early in her career, Dr. Hill-Jackson received the prestigious American Educational Research Association Spencer Fellowship for her qualitative dissertation and was conferred with the Lead Poisoning Star Award for her research in community education. In 2013, Hill-Jackson won a Traditional Core Fulbright Award and was hosted by the Center for Critical and Cultural Theory at the School of English, Communication and Philosophy at Cardiff University in Cardiff, Wales. Dr. Hill-Jackson received a 2018 to 2019 Melbourne G. Glasscock NTT Faculty Research Fellowship. It is both my honor and my pleasure to introduce you to Dr. Hill-Jackson.
Thank you, Claudia and Cassidy, for helping me out today. I appreciate my sisters as we have this important conversation about teachers, beginning teachers, and how to show up. So I think it's important that we sort of have a little level setting and talk about a little bit about why we're here, right? What does this mean in terms of how to show up? So when we're trained to be teachers, we often have a big focus on what it means to our professional life, right? So we're trained in the classroom at universities and beyond about what it means to have teachers' knowledge, teacher skills and dispositions, and hats off to our university professors to get us ready for that academic journey, that professionalism for our life. But we have to remember that we're not robots. We're not robots going into the classroom. We are real people We have real lives. We have real stressors. And you have to know it in your bones when you are a beginning teacher that you are taking all of you, not part of you, into the classroom. You are taking that part of you that's going through a difficult relationship. You are taking that part of you who's had maybe a troubled class, a troubled childhood, I should say. You're taking that part of you who is maybe wrestling with a health issue or a legal issue or a financial issue or whatever it is. We don't get to check that at the door. We are taking all of us into the classroom. So today's conversation is really about us focusing not just on the professional. We know how to do that. We got PD for days. Our school districts are pumping out that stuff left and right. But what we don't have are those meaningful opportunities to talk about who we are. Because the reason why we have teacher and educator professionals leaving the profession is because we don't talk about the personal stuff. We often think, oh, this isn't a good place, this isn't a good time. But when is it? Because most of the reasons for why we leave the profession, why we can't be there and show up for our babies is because it has to do with the personal. So I'm glad you all are here, not because you're a beginning teacher or you are a seasoned teacher, but because we need each other. We need to share more and more about the personal. We don't like to go there. We're going to talk about why we need to go there. We won't ask you to divulge anything personal today, but we do want to have a conversation for why the personal helps us to be and helps us to show up for our babies. Next slide, please. So about 10 years ago, I have been thinking about the personal for a long time. About 10 years ago, I created something called the S.E.L.F.I.S.H framework for how to engage this work, in thinking about who we are. I find that as a teacher educator, that we don't talk enough in our curriculum. We know how to teach science, how to teach language arts, for example, but we don't teach our folks how to really think about who they are as persons. So when it comes to our profession, we're pretty special, I like to think. I think we're the best profession on the planet, right? We're the best profession on the planet, second only to being a great parent or caretaker. This is how important this work is. But we don't ever have these important conversations. And often it's because we are that ideal, right? When you think about who teachers are, we are the profession, that caretaking profession, like the medical profession. And nobody ever thinks that we need, because this is the profession that pours out. But what about us? That's what this conversation is about today. What about us and your personal needs? And I want to submit to all of you that if you do not take care of who you are and that person, that really sort of defines who you are, then you're not going to be able to show up for your students. You need to have 7 commitments. So I created this framework a few years ago, and as many folks who listen to me, I talk about why it's important to be selfish. And I hope that that word stirs a little something in your soul, that you're thinking, oh no, I could never be selfish. We're taught by our loving families not to be selfish. But I'm telling you, if you want to survive in this career, you're gonna have to be selfish, but not in the way that you think, not in the way that it's about this sort of temporary, self-gratification, but in a way that's going to, pour into you so that you can pour into others. Because that's what our profession is about. We touch the future, but in doing that work, it's gonna burn you out. And some days you're gonna wake up and you're gonna think, what the heck was I thinking? Why did I go into this profession? I have to say again, this is the best profession on the planet, but we got to do it with intentionality, and we have to have these 7 commitments. So that's what the S.E.L.F.I.S.H framework is all about. So we're going to walk through each of these 7 commitments. Selfish is an acronym for each of the 7 commitments. S stands for story, E, empathy, L, lessons, F, fallibility, I, introspection, S, self-care, and H is healing. My brothers and sisters on this call today, I want to walk us through these 7 commitments. Next slide. All right, so Miss Cassidy, I want you to pay attention to the chat, because I want to engage everybody on the call right now with the first of our chat questions. So I want you to think about, how you sort of think about teachers, right? What was the one thing that you saw in a teacher, or you heard from a teacher, that reminded you that they were just everyday people, right? So when did you realize that teachers are real, that they have real lives? I got to tell you, for me, I grew up in a very rural town. There are only like 380 people in my town, probably same number today. And so I remember seeing my teacher, my 6th grade teacher, at the post office. And I was thinking, what the heck is she doing here? Like, it didn't even occur to me that she got mail. So I want you all to engage the chat and tell me, when did you sort of think about or see your teacher as a person? Please go ahead and engage the chat.
I saw my 5th grade teacher in a supermarket buying food. And she knew my mom. Saw a teacher at the grocery store. Yes. Growing up, one of my teachers shared something personal from her life. One of her family members were sick, and it made me realize that they think about things other than us students. When I saw my teacher at the grocery store, I was in kindergarten. I asked her if she was going back to the school because that's where I thought she lived. I realized it in college when I got my first master's degree, and I was invited to get together with some professors. My mom was an assistant principal and has been in education for 25 years. So seeing her students out in public, they would be so surprised seeing a fish out of the water. When my 4th grade teacher came to my birthday party. I personally ran into my teacher at the movies one day during a school day. I may have been taken out of school, and she was there. But her husband was on leave, so she was spending time with him.
All right, next slide, please. I love these stories because they remind us of the fact that we get shocked, at this thought that our teachers are these human people. And it should not be a shock to all of us. So thank you for sharing, everybody. The first S in our 7 commitments is story. And I think it's so important to underline the fact that every person, every teacher has a story. And so, it's important for us to remember that our teachers don't fold up and go into the desk drawer at the end of the day. They actually have real lives. And part of that life is filled with a lot of great things, in terms of their own experiences and family life. But a lot of it is filled with trauma as well. It's important to know that we should have a place for story in teacher education, this idea of narrative. There is this author by the name of Niemeyer that says that, human beings love stories so much that we should be considered as homo neurons instead of homo sapiens. Because when you think about story, the noun story, that is so important to the human experience. We love it. When you think about your best memories, it's probably somebody reading a story to you. When you think about your best memories, there's probably a show or a movie at the theater that you remember, or someone telling you about something that happened to them. This idea of story is so important to the human experience that we have to remember to include it in not just the personal parts of our life, but also in educator preparation as well. And we also have to remember that teachers and educators, especially our new and beginning teachers, are not immune to story and the power of story, and that we all have a story. And I think so often as we engage in our field, we forget that there is this humanity. You know, we always talk about the two sides, right? For, you know, of the learner in terms of the academic and the cognitive as well as the affective. But doesn't that also apply to the teacher, right? There's the professional side of us. There's also that human side or affective side. So we all carry this. And why we try and deny it is beyond me. I think there was a time where we thought that we could check things at the door, that we don't bring our biases and our baggage with us. But the reality is that we do. Now, the smart teachers know how to check it. They know how to deal with it. The teachers who haven't had the support don't know how to do that kind of intensive work. And so it's important that we have those conversations, especially with beginning teachers. The research shares that, by year 3, 30% of our beginning teachers are gone. And by year 5, 50% are gone. And a lot of it has to do with what's happening in the school, right? But a lot of it too is because they can't handle it. Their humanity, their own personhood and their own story may get in the way. All right, next slide. The next E in our 7 commitments is empathy. And so we have to be committed to this idea of empathy. Empathy means to take the perspective of the other, that we have to be willing to feel with others. And it's important that we understand that the very nature of empathy requires us to have compassion for others. So when you're on this selfish journey, you understand that you cannot, sort of plow through as a professional, as a seasoned educator, but especially as a beginning teacher, because often our focus is on getting the work done. But we also have to ensure that we're taking time to consider the personhood of others as well. We get this notion of sympathy and empathy a bit confused. I think it's important that we share a little video. It's only 2 minutes long, so you guys bear with me. And I bet you 50% of you all online have probably seen this amazing video by Brene Brown. If you've seen it before, good, because now you get to see it through the perspective of the S.E.L.F.I.S.H framework. Would you mind sharing that with us, Claudia?
So what is empathy, and why is it very different than sympathy? Empathy fuels connection. Sympathy drives disconnection. Empathy, it's very interesting. Teresa Wiseman is a nursing scholar who studied professions, very diverse professions where empathy is relevant, and came up with 4 qualities of empathy. Perspective taking, the ability to take the perspective of another person or recognize their perspective as their truth. Staying out of judgment, not easy when you enjoy it as much as most of us do. Recognizing emotion in other people and then communicating that. Empathy is feeling with people. And to me, I always think of empathy as this kind of sacred space when someone's kind of in a deep hole and they shout out from the bottom and they say, I'm stuck, it's dark, I'm overwhelmed. And then we look and we say, hey, you climb down. I know what it's like down here, and you're not alone. Sympathy is, ooh, it's bad, no. You want a sandwich? Empathy is a choice, and it's a vulnerable choice, because in order to connect with you, I have to connect with something in myself that knows that feeling. Rarely, if ever, does an empathic response begin with "at least." Yeah. And we do it all the time. Because you know what? Someone just shared something with us that's incredibly painful, and we're trying to silver lining it. I don't think that's a verb, but I'm using it as one. We're trying to put the silver lining around it. So, I had a miscarriage. Oh, at least you know you can get pregnant. I think my marriage is falling apart. At least you have a marriage. John's getting kicked out of school. At least Sarah is an A student. But one of the things we do sometimes in the face of very difficult conversations is we try to make things better. If I share something with you that's very difficult, I'd rather you say, "I don't even know what to say right now. I'm just so glad you told me." Because the truth is, rarely can a response make something better. What makes something better is connection.
I know many of you probably have seen that video, but I think it's important to see it within the context of our selfish framework, because what we're saying is that, empathy, and Brene Brown said it so well, is to feel with. You're willing to say, I'm going to get in that hole with you. So you may ask, how is that selfish? Well, sympathy is something that you sort of bestow to other people. But empathy is something you give to yourself, because now you're saying, I am inviting a connection with you, that I want to sit in a space and feel, not for you, which is what sympathy does, but I want to feel with you. And that's profound. And all of us on this call, seasoned and beginning, we understand that to even, progress any kind of conversation academically, we have to be in relationship with our students. So empathy, even though it's giving to others, but in a very casual sense, it's giving to ourselves as well. There's something powerful about being in connection with others. All right, next slide. So the L in our selfish framework, lessons, is another commitment of our 7 commitments. A lesson is an instructive example. It is solution focused. I was introduced several years ago to a form of self-care called narrative therapy. And this is where you just do a couple of things in a couple of different ways, where you just write out your difficulties. You share the challenges that you've had. And it's not that you do it in a public space. You can do it just for yourself in terms of journal writing, or you can bring people who are like-minded, like your educator peers, together, and you're sharing in your stories, and hopefully you're framing it in a way that it's instructive for others. I found that when I was in my own dark place several years ago, when I was considering walking away from teaching, I found it very instructive for me to share my story with others. So it's beyond the story, the S in our selfish framework, but here we're moving to storytelling. And you can storytell with yourself in your journal, or you can do it almost like bringing in a book club or a group where you're sharing what has happened to you. And so I invited a few years ago, a few of our Aggie friends to share their stories with me, and they found it very cathartic. I invited someone who was recovering from cancer, someone who was coming out as a gay teacher. I invited someone who was going through divorce as a pre-K director of a center. I invited a bunch of Aggies to tell our story. And we did it to support all of you. We were vulnerable, but we also did it to help ourselves as well. So we have to find ways to tell our stories. But here's the kicker. You don't just tell your story just to be telling your story and to be complaining, but you have to tell your story so that there is a lesson at the end, so that there is something instructive about it. And that's the difference between sort of storytelling and lesson making, that you get it out, you share it, you push for that cathartic piece, but you always put that sort of lesson on the end. And I invite all of you to continue journaling, to find those folks with whom you know you can share your most secret stories with, and not do it in a way, because we don't want to ever be the complainers. We don't ever want to be the folks whose glass is half full. So it's important to share your story, and always, you know, do it in a way that frames the lesson. Next slide. So my next question to all of you, and I'm going to ask my friend Cassidy to keep an eye on the chat. What do you need from your peers, you know, who are educators and teachers, in order to share your personal stories and traumas with them? You know, we need certain things from folks if we're going to do this. And we need this because getting it out helps us, right? What do you need from others to do this incredibly vulnerable work? Please share in the chat.
There needs to be a certain amount of respect and trust between us.
Absolutely. Anyone else, please? That's a tough one. I hope you all are just sitting within that, because if you're going to survive this profession, you need people with whom you can trust.
Trust, honesty, safe space to be open. Trust in a safe environment.
Mm-hmm. Trust, safe environment.
A safe space. Time.
Time, space, safety, trust. That's so key, because we live in such a litigious environment that it's incredibly hard to know that things you're sharing in an email or in a text message or in a group meeting are not going to be shared with others. So I'm praying for you all who are on this call, who find any benefit to sharing your stories with others, the lessons learned from them with others, that you find a group of people with whom you know you can be vulnerable. There's some risk taking in that, but if you set up the parameters, hey, this is what we need from each other. We have to be able to debrief and unpack with each other. I have 3 people in my life personally that I know that I can go to, and I'm in a safe space that I can say, you know, what the heck? What happened here? I'm not so good today. And these people lift me up. And I'm hoping that you all are finding that you have those persons or persons in your life with whom you could go to and say, I need to share, and let me get it out. And then you guys are going to work on framing it in a way that there's a lesson at the end. So it can't be one of those, you know, conversations where you're just complaining. Get it out, complain, but then put a bow tie on it at the end. Where's the lesson, right? So it's getting the story out, but also finding the story, the lesson in all of it as well. I hope you all find that. We're going to move on. All right, so we're continuing with our S.E.L.F.I.S.H framework, and fallibility is next. And it is our next commitment in the S.E.L.F.I.S.H framework. So I want to talk to you all about fallibility, because this is something that I maybe I'm the only one that struggles with this. But fallibility is this idea about liability, admitting your mistakes. It's a part of the S.E.L.F.I.S.H framework. There is a real there's something magical that can happen when you admit to your mistakes. There are folks who study mistakes They are called wrongologists. Can you, right? They are actually called wrongologists. There is a reason why many of us don't like to admit our mistakes in our personal life, but also our professional life. I think it's because we think that admitting our mistakes makes us look weak. But in actuality, when you say to a student or a partner, you know what, I messed up, I got it wrong, and I'm going to work on that, and I'm going to do better. What that does is it elevates you. It elevates you in the mind of others. And instead of them seeing you as someone who doesn't have a spine, who is not authentic, what it does is that they see you in a whole different light. Here's the thing though. It's important that we understand that when we are admitting mistakes, that we understand that we have to admit mistakes to the small things, right? Like, oh, you know, I bought the wrong flavored ice cream for you, my dear. But also the big things, right? You know, in your personal life where you have overlooked, you know, a family member or a partner, or in your classroom where you've accused students of doing something, you know, we have to call it on the small things and the big things, and not just find ways to skirt the issues. It's really, really important that our folks in our personal as well as our professional lives understand that when we see that we have not made good decisions, that we're going to be big enough to say, I got that wrong. And it does something for others, like I said, because it elevates us. But it also does something for ourselves. It reminds us that our purview, our perspective is often narrowed, and that we need to pause to consider the perspective of others. It does something for our own psyche. Also, it does something for us as well. This idea about self-compassion. So in empathy, compassion for others is important. But when it comes to fallibility and you doing this, you know, accountability for yourself, it really is about you giving yourself that kind of self-compassion that we need, because we're hard on ourselves. We don't want to get it wrong. We don't like being made fool of in public. And that's where we give ourselves permission. We give grace and permission to others, but doesn't it make sense that we give grace and permission to ourselves? Next slide, please. Introspection. Remember, we're still continuing on with our selfish framework. Introspection is the I in selfish. It is another commitment that we have to make. We spend a lot of days just plugging along. And I got friends on this call who call me on it all the time. You know, Dr. J, you know, are you going to take some time away from the computer? We remind each other as girlfriends, hey, when are you going to take some time? I am so bad at this. We need time away from our screens and all these things, especially, you know, beginning teachers as well, because we need to not just get in the habit of just plugging along. We need introspection time. I actually plan it on my phone. I have it on my phone where I have like little reminders that say, you know, give grace, give gratitude. I pause every morning before I get started. And because I'm a woman of faith, I ask, you know, that my actions be guided in a way that I don't hurt others. So it really is a time to think about others. But I got to tell you, brothers and sisters on this call, it really is about you as well, about us all taking that time to really go deep. Because when we don't spend time unpacking those difficult things and the great things in our life, they come back. They come back, and they come back with a vengeance. So we have to look inwardly and examine our very own thoughts and meanings and how we make meaning out of it. There is a lot to be said of thinking about thinking and pausing. And we don't do it well. I know I'm the biggest perpetrator of this. So I love it when my girlfriends remind me to, Val, did you pause? Did you have think time? Did you have you time? I got to tell you, when it comes to the field of educator preparation, we don't teach the art of reflection. I got to tell you, you'll find that word reflection on every syllabus as you're being trained as an undergraduate and in graduate school, but nobody teaches us how to do it. No one says, take this process, do X, Y, and Z. There are lots of reflective processes out there. I did a review. I found of nearly 200 plus. I got to tell you, I want you all to look up reflection processes and find one that resonates with you. And then when you find it, then you need to tweak it and make it work for you, because nothing will work unless it works for you. So for me, I like to just have that pause where I have these 3 things in mind to make me sort of focus in on things that are awkward and painful and things that I take joy in. I have to find my own reflection process, and you have to find yours as well, because we don't teach reflection. We don't teach it. We say it is the most important skill of being an educator, and we don't teach it. So teach yourself. You're smart. You can Google reflection just the same as I can, and then you find something that works for you. And the problem I have with all these processes out there, they never sort of hit the mark. And that's why I say learn what they are and then find something that works for you. And so that you can start really working on unpacking these issues in your life. Next slide, please. All right, we're now continuing with our selfish framework, and we are at the second S in selfish. And so this is all about self-care. I mean, people are making a whole boatload of money on this topic on self-care. My Lord. I even have the term in the cover of my book, but I mean self-care differently. I mean telling your story. I mean, I feel like that's a way, but there are other ways too. And I hope you all are finding ways, because I got to tell you, when I look at these dimensions on the right on the screen about self-care, I'm like, oh my God, I'm doing so poorly at most of them, but I hope you all are doing pretty well. So self-care are those behaviors that preserve one's life and health and overall well-being. One of the things we know that when it comes to people who are in the caring professions, like nurses and teachers, we do a horrible job. We focus, we think, oh, I am super teacher and I'm going to be there for everybody and everything. I'm like, oh my Lord, you know, there's something called compassion fatigue, where you wake up thinking about everybody else, you go to bed thinking about everybody else, and you never think about yourself. And I know that I have been haunted, and I suspect all of you brothers and sisters on this call, you've been haunted by this as well. We worry about our babies. We worry. There are so many learners who are doing well in our beautiful state of Texas, but there are so many learners that need us in so many ways, at K-12 level, at post-secondary level, and they're pulling our energies. Just today, I probably heard from 6 students that I've taught formally and who need something from me. And I want to be there for them because of compassion. I have that gene, you have that gene, but that gene can be worn out. There is such a thing as compassion fatigue. So we have to remind each other, and thank you for reminding me, and I'm reminding you all, that we need emotional self-care, physical self-care, right? Mental self-care, social self-care, right? I love social self-care because that means that it's important that we socialize. It's important that we come together in webinars, but it's important, like if you want to get together at the bar on Friday night or your place of worship on Sunday, guess what, guys? That's social self-care too. And then spiritual self-care. But whatever it is, you got to know that whatever works for, you know, your friend Sally down the hall, it probably won't work for you. You got to create your own self-care plan. What are you going to do? And one of the things that I'm learning to do that a lot of our new and beginning teachers don't know to do is you got to put you on your calendar, because have you ever seen a beginning teacher's calendar? Boy, they got that thing laid out. They got it color coded. I'm going to teach this class. I'm going to give this, exercise. My God, it's beautiful. But nowhere on their color coded calendar do they have themselves scheduled. Put yourself on your calendar. Beginning teachers don't know how to say no. I'm going to teach you today how to say no. So everybody's going to pull on you because you're young and you're energetic and I can do this, but you have to learn the art of saying no. So when you put yourself on your calendar and someone asks you, hey, can you do X, Y, and Z on Thursday evening? And you look at your calendar and you see me scheduled, you can actually tell them, I'm sorry, I cannot participate in that. I have another obligation, and it will be the truth because you will have it scheduled on your calendar. So schedule you as you put together your own self-care plan. All right, next slide, please. All right, we are now moving to the H in our selfish framework. Oh, hallelujah, hallelujah. H has to do with healing, because we have to get to a place where we know that the bad times are going to come, but we have it within us to bounce back from difficult, places in our lives. Everybody on this call has had a difficult experience, one or more in their lives. And so it's important that we have grit to get through it, and we have resilience to get through it. There's something called post-traumatic growth. That means that you've gone through the fire and you've come out on the other side better than before you went through that difficult experience. Can you imagine that? So that is called post-traumatic growth. And we need to ensure that we have the grit and the resilience to bounce back, because often we lose people to a profession because they're not gritty, because they don't have resilience. And so can we develop it? I think we can. I think if we stick to a selfish framework, we can get to a place where we realize, and here's the kicker that I try and tell my own baby girl, April Rose, and I tell her all the time, Rosie, you are going to have difficult times in your life. That is a guarantee. Now, your job is to figure out how you're going to come out on the other side. So when you go through life knowing that hardships are going to follow you, you know, or should expect, right, that they're going to come, but that you're going to be okay. You got to ride the wave. You got to learn how to get through the trauma. Now, there's a difference. I heard the scholar say to talk about this idea of reviewing versus reliving one's trauma. Some of you on this call, my goodness, I have no idea what your traumas are, but I bet they're huge. We don't even have time to unpack all of that. I'm inviting you not to relive that mess. I'm inviting you to review it instead, to think back on it, to think about the lessons and all of that. And that's how we get to a place of healing. I want to do a little exercise with all of you. Our friend Claudia, we're going to talk about where we are, because I bet you we all have these traumas, big and small, going on in our lives. And so I'd like for us to talk about where we are. No, look, we're not talking about it today. That's your trauma, right? We don't want to do that today. What we want to do is talk about where we are, right? And so I want you to grab a little sticky note and talk about that. But let me give the instructions over to Claudia.
All right, so on the left-hand corner, you will see different icons. If you press the sticky note, then you can choose whichever color, and then you can place your sticky note. You could do it anonymously, or you could do it with your name. It's really your own preference. And then you can change the size, and then you can even put it somewhere wherever you feel you would answer this question.
I like your little small smile there, Claudia. Thank you. Where are you? When you think back on all the traumas you've had in your life, where would you place yourself? Yeah. I want to hold a little space for you all, please. Continue. Claudia can't hear us. So Cassidy, we may need to text Claudia when we're ready to finish, okay? Thank you, Mateo. Thank you, JC, Sam, Cassidy. Someone is saying I am healed, trying to be positive about the bad things. Because we're human, right? We bring our humanity. Absolutely. Someone has here, I don't know where they belong on our little jam board, but all placements are welcome. No judgment. All right. I'm grateful for what I have. Oh, amen, amen. All right. Okay, we're gonna start wrapping this up. Cassidy, you can let Claudia know that we're gonna end in about 30 seconds here. So I want you all to see where you've landed. And isn't this something where most of us have placed our little stickies on? I have good days and bad days. We also have one of our friends online, I'm grateful, right? So it's somewhat straddling the two areas there between healing and good days and bad days. That's fair. I think this says something too, because all of these placements are valued for sure. But I think this says something about our grittiness, that we realize, all of us on this call, we're gonna have good days and bad days, and that's okay. That's okay. Wonderful. And that we will continue the work in whatever space that we find ourselves. Amen. Thank you all for sharing. Thank you all for sharing where you are. We're gonna move on. All right, thank you. So after healing, that's the last letter in our acronym. So we need to say now, what does this all mean? The so what, right? The so what? Well, the so what is that we need to know that we're in a community that needs to support each other, that many of us are having those good days and bad days. And a lot of the research confirms it. According to the American Federation of Teachers and Badass Teachers Association, a recent study, 61% of our teachers are stressed out. And these are folks who have to show up and perform academically for learners. And this number is a serious number. I actually think it's underrated, but I didn't do the study. But I think it's important that we realize that we have folks that we're working alongside every day or doing the very best that they can, and they're stressed out. Next slide. So back to the selfish framework. It is not selfish to refill your own cup so that you can pour into others. It's not just a luxury, it is essential. So the selfish framework is actually giving us, the seasoned and the beginning educators, permission to take stock of who we are and to pour in ourselves first. How can you pour into anybody else when your cup is empty? And a lot of us on this call are doing great work at that. We're pouring into ourselves. And some of us, like me, I will raise my hand first. We're not doing so well at that. We need to take care of ourselves, just like, right, the flight attendant on the plane that says, passengers, please, in case of emergency, place the oxygen on yourself first and then support the person, the child, the elderly next to you. Take care of you. You are the first, and then take care of our babies. It's really important. When we think about how we're going to be evaluated in schools, thinking about the appraisal systems, they're coming in to look at how we're doing in terms of instruction, assessment, planning, and professional responsibilities. You can't do any of that work when you are a hurt person, when you are unhealed, when you are trying to figure out who you are, when you're recovering from trauma, when you are stressed out. We have to get ahead of the burnout, because stress building up over time leads to burnout. And that's where I was so many years ago, not so long ago, when I was ready to walk away. I was burned out. And it wasn't until a wise person in my life said, Val, come here, sister, let me talk to you. Took me aside, and I started focusing on filling my own cup. I'm encouraging all of you, seasoned and beginning, to fill your own cup, to be selfish. So we want to wrap up and have a little debriefing. I want you all to be thinking about 3 new things you learned today, 2 things that you all will implement going forward, and 1 thing that you will never forget. All right, Cassidy, I think I said your bit, but maybe you can reinforce it for me. All right, what's 1 thing in the chat? Could you please share 1 thing you will never forget from today's conversation?
Reflection is not taught, but it's needed.
Let's hear 2 more.
Take time to heal. Clear explanation of sympathy versus empathy. That video was new to me. Another comment about enjoying that video.
Oh, yes.
Take care of yourself, then you are best prepared to help others effectively.
Absolutely.
Self-care is important.
Absolutely. Wonderful. Thank you all for sharing. Thank you so much. I thought everybody on the planet has seen that little video. I'm glad we had some folks to see it for the first time. Please send your questions. If anything pops up, you can, contact me directly. We just want to review our objective. Our goal today was to have a community discussion of the selfish framework, and wanted all of you, 100% of you, to know how to show up. How do you show up? Well, you have to be selfish. You have to be selfish. Thank you. Please learn more about our Mentoring and Coaching Academy at the link on your screen and in the chat. Thank you all for participating.